Arthur Miller. The name might not ring a bell for many now, but once it hummed with a quiet kind of genius. He wasn't a Silicon Valley titan, not with the flashy cars or the endless venture capital. Arthur was something rarer, a builder, a man who saw problems and crafted elegant solutions, often with little more than a soldering iron and a stubborn belief in what was right. He built his company, Miller Innovations, from the ground up, piece by painstaking piece, a testament to hard work, to ingenuity, and to a time when a handshake still meant something. He believed in people, too, especially in young talent. That's where Ethan came in. Bright, ambitious, with a mind like a steel trap and a knack for the new, digital frontier. Arthur saw himself in Ethan, a younger, faster version. He took him under his wing, shared his knowledge, his vision. He trusted him. But the world had changed. The digital age, with its algorithms and its endless ambition, had a different set of rules. Rules Arthur, in his quiet integrity, hadn't fully grasped. Ethan, whom Arthur had mentored and trusted like a son, saw not a mentor, but an obstacle. He saw Arthur's legacy, his life's work, as something to be seized. Ethan used a loophole. The complex algorithm, buried deep within the very system Arthur had helped create, became the weapon. He claimed Arthur was out of touch, resistant to innovation, that the company needed new blood. The courts, blinded by the jargon and the digital smoke, sided with Ethan. Arthur Miller, the man who built it all, was left with nothing. His company, his reputation, his life's work all gone. He was left with only the bitter taste of betrayal and the chilling silence of a future he hadn't planned. Most men, at Arthur's age after such a fall, would have simply faded. They would have retreated into bitterness, into the quiet despair of what was lost. But Arthur Miller wasn't most men. He refused to be defined by his defeat. He refused to let the last chapter of his life be written by someone else's greed, while the world saw an old man, stripped of his legacy, fading into obscurity. Arthur was quietly, meticulously, studying his enemy, not Ethan, not directly, but the very thing Ethan had used as his weapon, the algorithm, the complex, digital labyrinth that had stolen Arthur's life's work. His garage, once a place of invention and creation, became his new battlefield. Surrounded by dusty old circuit boards, forgotten technical manuals, and the hum of an ancient computer, Arthur began to learn. He devoured books on modern coding, on digital forensics, on the intricate, often hidden pathways of the internet. He spent countless hours, late into the night, dissecting lines of code, poring over legal documents that had once seemed impenetrable. He wasn't seeking revenge, not in the fiery, destructive sense. He was seeking something far more precise. He was seeking justice, and he knew that justice, like any well-designed system, required patience, precision, and a deep, almost intimate understanding of the very system that had been used against him. He also quietly reached out, not to confront, but to listen. To former employees, to industry contacts, to anyone who had also been touched by Ethan's ruthless ambition. He gathered their stories, their grievances, their quiet suspicions. Each piece of information was a tiny thread, and Arthur, with the patience of a spider, began to weave them into a net, an invisible net, cast wide, waiting. He learned that Ethan, in his arrogance, had expanded the company rapidly, cutting corners, pushing boundaries, always seeking the next big score. He was building an empire, but on a foundation of sand, and Arthur, with his quiet diligence, was watching every grain slip away. He knew that true power wasn't in the flash of a new algorithm, but in the quiet, persistent pursuit of truth, and he was very, very patient. The years passed. Ethan's empire grew, sprawling across the digital landscape. His name was everywhere, on financial news, in tech magazines, lauded as a visionary. He built a fortress of code and capital, seemingly impenetrable. But Arthur knew that even the most formidable fortresses often have a forgotten back door, a single overlooked brick. Then, one late night after years of relentless study, Arthur found it. Not a grand conspiracy, not a hidden vault of stolen millions. It was far more subtle, far more elegant. A tiny flaw. A single, almost invisible line of code buried deep within the original algorithm, the very one Ethan had used to seize control. It was a vulnerability that only someone who had built the original system, who understood its every nuance, would recognize. A ghost in the machine, waiting to be awakened. This flaw wasn't a bug that crashed systems or caused immediate chaos. No, it was far more insidious. It was a subtle misdirection, a clever miscalculation in how certain data was processed and reported, a way to make numbers appear slightly different, to obscure certain transactions, to subtly inflate projections. It was the kind of error that, over time, could create a vast, hidden discrepancy, a discrepancy that, if exposed, would unravel everything Ethan had built. Arthur didn't rush. He didn't celebrate. He simply observed. He watched as Ethan, blinded by his own success and arrogance, continued to exploit this very flaw, unknowingly digging his own grave with every inflated report, every obscured transaction. Ethan believed he was untouchable, that his digital fortress was impregnable. He had no idea that the old man he had cast aside was now holding the key to its quiet disassembly. Arthur knew he couldn't directly attack the algorithm. Ethan had built too many safeguards, too many layers of protection. Instead, he would use the flaw to expose Ethan's own unethical practices, turning the very system against its master. He would simply shine a light on what was already there, hidden in plain sight. The long game was finally entering its decisive phase. And Arthur, with the quiet precision of a master craftsman, was ready to make his move. Arthur's move wasn't a grand, public declaration. It was a series of quiet, almost imperceptible nudges. Like a master chess player, he didn't attack directly. He simply shifted a few pieces, knowing the cascade of consequences that would follow. First, he anonymously alerted a specific, lesser-known regulatory agency, not with accusations, but with a meticulously compiled report detailing a potential anomaly in data reporting, citing the very flaw he had discovered. He framed it as a technical curiosity, a subtle glitch that might indicate a larger issue. He knew the agency, known for its thoroughness but also its slow, methodical pace, would eventually investigate. Next, he reached out to a tenacious, investigative journalist he'd followed for years. Not with the full story, but with a tantalizing tip about unusual patterns in Ethan's company's financial disclosures, hinting at a deeper, systemic issue. He provided just enough breadcrumbs to pique the journalist's interest, knowing their relentless pursuit of truth would do the rest. He also subtly encouraged the former employees he'd quietly connected with over the years. He didn't ask them to lie or exaggerate. He simply reminded them of the truth of their own experiences, of the corners cut, the promises broken, the ethical lines blurred under Ethan's leadership. He gave them the courage to speak, knowing their collective voices would be harder to ignore. Ethan, meanwhile, was oblivious. He was too busy basking in the glow of his latest acquisition, too consumed by his own image. He dismissed the initial inquiries as minor annoyances, the whispers as disgruntled former employees. He believed his digital fortress was impenetrable, his reputation unassailable. He had no idea that the very algorithm he had used to build his empire was now quietly, systematically, dismantling it from within. The beauty of Arthur's plan lay in its indirectness. He wasn't the one pulling the levers of destruction. He was simply revealing the truth, allowing the system and Ethan's own hubris to do the work. The long game was playing out, not with a bang, but with the quiet, relentless hum of consequences. And the first tremors were beginning to be felt. The tremors grew into an earthquake. The regulatory agency, slow but relentless, uncovered the systemic fraud. The investigative journalist, armed with Arthur's subtle hints, and the courage of former employees, published a scathing expose. The headlines, once praising Ethan, now screamed of deception and corporate malfeasance. Ethan's world, built on a foundation of digital smoke and mirrors, began to crumble. Stock prices plummeted. Investors panicked. Lawsuits mounted. The very algorithm he had so arrogantly wielded as a weapon now turned against him, its hidden flaw exposing every inflated projection, every messical shortcut. Arthur watched it all unfold from the quiet solitude of his garage. He saw Ethan's face on the news, no longer arrogant, but pale and drawn, a man caught in a net of his own making. The irony was almost poetic. Ethan, who had dismissed Arthur as out of touch, was now utterly lost in the very digital world he claimed to master. He was being consumed by the very system he thought he controlled. There was no triumph in Arthur's heart, no wild exultation, only a quiet sense of completion. A deep, abiding satisfaction that the truth, however long it took, had finally surfaced. He hadn't sought to destroy Ethan, not truly. He had simply sought to reveal him, to show the world the true cost of ambition unchecked by integrity. Ethan was forced to resign. His reputation was in tatters, his company in shambles, and he faced a barrage of legal consequences. The empire he had built so quickly and ruthlessly dissolved just as swiftly. The algorithm, once his symbol of power, was now a stark reminder of his hubris, a digital monument to his downfall. Arthur didn't seek to reclaim his old position. He knew that the company, once his pride, had been tainted beyond repair. Instead, he started a new venture, not a grand corporation, but a small, ethical consulting firm, helping others navigate the complex digital landscape with integrity. He built it on the principles that had guided him throughout his life: honesty, diligence, and a quiet commitment to doing what's right, even when it's difficult. His story became a quiet legend, a testament to the enduring power of patience, the wisdom of experience, and the unwavering belief that true justice, though it may play the long game, always prevails in the end. Arthur Miller, the old man and the algorithm, had not just reclaimed his legacy, he had redefined it. The dust settled. The headlines faded. Life, as it always does, moved on. For Arthur Miller, there was no bitterness, only a quiet sense of completion. The long game had been played, and the scales of justice, however slowly, had balanced. Athens' empire crumbled, not by Arthur's direct hand, but by the very flaws Ethan himself had exploited. The algorithm, once his weapon, became his undoing. He was consumed by the very system he thought he controlled. Arthur didn't seek to reclaim his past. He built a new future, a testament to integrity and quiet purpose. He proved that the old ways, the values of honesty and perseverance, could still outsmart the new. But as Arthur looked out at the world, the quiet satisfaction in his eyes, one couldn't help but wonder, had he truly found peace? Or had the long game, the meticulous planning, the quiet waiting, transformed him into something else entirely, something colder, perhaps, a man who understood the true power of patience and the chilling satisfaction of a perfectly executed plan?